Hey Brian, how you doing, buddy?
Good. What's up, buddy?
Not much. It is Friday here in Denver. What day is it there in Michigan?
Yeah, Friday also.
It's still Friday.
Same.
Good to hear. I know you got a big weekend
That's
planned.
that's some of that East Coast elitism that gets referenced in this thing we're going to talk about later. I'm thinking, people on the East Coast think it's just a different day.
Well, I mean, you guys live in a different world. You live in a world that's usually a
Different
little bit
world.
more. It's more cultured. It's you're closer to Europe. So
Yeah.
obviously you're going to have more history there. I think that's just how it works.
Where
What do
I
you
live
think?
is kind of a double-edged sword, though, because I live in the Eastern time zone, but on like the farthest west part of it you possibly could be in, to the point where no one even knows that Michigan, Detroit are in the Eastern time zone. You fly into Detroit and it's in the airport like every 30 seconds. It's like, just so you know, Eastern time zone. Everyone thinks we're central.
Yeah, it is a bit odd. I've kind of found that weird, just in trying to set up our recordings that
Yeah. Eastern time zone doesn't
that
even
far.
want it, man.
No, you're that far ahead. It's wild. So what do you got? What do you got planned this weekend? Let's tell people where we're going to be so that way they can break into our homes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be gone all weekend. No one here but my cat. So feel free to break in. I'm going camping. We're going camping. We're going kind of up north.
Now, do you lock your doors when you leave, or
Yeah, we'll lock them. We'll lock them. Lock them.
but,
I'll twist the deadbolt. There's no alarm.
okay,
There's nothing in here worth taking.
that's just it. Like, why would you?
The insurance bill's paid up.
Yeah. By the way, that somebody broke into our car a few weeks ago. Never did find Catherine's work computer. So the Arapahoe County cops, they're working hard here in the Denver metro area, trying to find that computer. I just don't think they care, honestly. They just don't care.
I mean, I think maybe they want to care, but can they care?
They're supposed to care. Yeah, they're supposed to care.
It's like in the Big Lebowski. Like, you got any leads?
Yeah, leads, man. We got a bunch of leads.
We
They got us working in
guys
shifts.
working around the clock. Yeah.
They got us working in shifts. Oh, all right. So it is.
Yeah,
we should
they
probably.
stole your computer. It's gone. That's all there is to it.
It was a work computer, so it's not ours. I didn't lose much sleep over it, quite honestly.
Even though it was your fault.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, don't park the car outside. That's definitely my fault. Hey, we should probably talk some sports before we talk some sports.
Sure.
Before we talk sports, today is going to be our last day on Mile High Sports Radio. Are you sad? End of an era. Are you apprehensive or not apprehensive? Do you worry at all that people think we just gave up?
No, I don't. Well, I mean, I guess maybe that's what people think. It just wasn't, it wasn't a perfect fit. Not Mile High Radio. I think just radio in general.
Yeah, it's just not, we don't get into the drive time, who's getting drafted, big news of the day stuff. It's not what we do. And we don't have like a craft brewery show or a weekend / outdoor, fishing show. So we're going to podcast.
I don't know. I mean, I hope my deepest hope is that some people, heard us on the radio and liked it. I don't know if that's what happened. I don't know if there's someone, cozying up to their radio right now who's like, oh crap, they're gone. Maybe that's happening.
So Brian, let's pretend
that'd be cool.
Well, for those 5,000 people out there who are going to have that situation, not this Sunday, but next, what do we tell them? Where can they find us, Brian?
iTunes, Stitcher, and some other newfangled thing.
It is called Anchor, by the way. So Anchor, yes, I knew about Anchor. Sorry, people who are seeing me scooting close to my computer here. I'm trying to post the link, here to Facebook, so that way our billions of followers can make sure to tune in and see what's going on. Yeah, so Michael Caraway, who Jay Schrader actually put us in contact with, had recommended Anchor. And so you can find us on Anchor is probably the best podcast, non-Apple podcast app available, if that makes sense. So you can find us on that. So we're on Anchor, we're still on Stitcher, we're on Google Play, of course, Apple Podcasts, which has been our home from day one, and SoundCloud. So wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us. People they're excited to hear the cussing again, I would assume. They're excited to see me use my limited vocabulary and lean on words like F and S and D Yeah. So there you go.
The jokes become a little bit more lowbrow when we're strictly on the podcast. So
that's true, everybody.
If you thought the show was too clean, just come on over.
All right. So there's that. Follow us on Facebook, fb.me/sportsnerds. We're on Twitter @_sportsnerds. We're on Instagram. Our followers continue to blow up on Instagram. I think people are really they enjoy the weird, wacky stuff that we do on the social space. So that is @sports.nerds. What else am I missing? Everything is also easy to find if you go to linktr.ee/sports.nerds. Again, I'm gonna write that up on the screen right now. So it's linktr.ee/sports.nerds, and that just allows us to put all of our links up there. We'll have a U.S. Open tournament challenge in a few weeks, so if you're wanting to follow us off the radio, make sure that you follow us on social media so that way you can stay up to date with that kind of stuff. Other news, I think we're going to be having an interview next week with the gents over from the Best Baseball podcast. That is still scheduled for Tuesday night. Brian and I will sit down and talk to two guys who know as much, if not more, about baseball than us. They probably know more, right? They're able to
know more, yeah.
They can go deep into the stats. That's literally, I believe, at least Holden's job is to just write about baseball.
Yeah.
So
one of them's a big stat dude.
Mm-hmm.
But they both clearly have kind of ins into the industry. They know people. Like one of the guys, he tells stories about interviewing who's the guy who managed the White Sox for a long time?
Ozzie Guillen?
Ozzie Guillen, there you go. I was thinking of Ozzy Osbourne, but I knew that was wrong.
You were close, obviously.
Ozzy something or other.
Yes. So, yeah, for some reason they have some ins. I don't know. We'll have to ask them, right? That might be a question that we need to get into. I also do want to pick their brain about the Ichiro thing, because I know that Ryan Spader appears to be a big Ichiro supporter. So they probably have the stats to back it up and to counter your argument against Ichiro more so than I do. So
overrated.
Yes, overrated. Wonderful comment there from Logan Martin, who has joined the live broadcast. He says, "Brian, lighten up. Get the serial killer look off your face." So we are live on Facebook, folks. Every week.
Man, you gotta edit that out. I just dropped the bomb.
Oh, I better write that down on my piece of paper. What minute are we in? So 7:40. Brian cussed. Thank you, Brian, for adding
no problem. Sorry.
Seconds into my morning.
Just add a beep.
Yep, add a beep. Okay, so
I'm not watching myself as I do it. I'm like reading stuff. So I think the serial killer face is like my reading face. I don't know if that makes it better or not.
I want to know what you look like when you poop. Is it the same look? Okay, we have 3 minutes. And I know there's one particular story that you and I read this week that we want to just touch upon. Do you want to highlight that Pau Gasol open letter? Did you write it for the Players'
Tribune? Everyone got a chance to read this letter. Pau Gasol writes an open letter about female coaches, and it's a really interesting read. He kind of starts off telling the story about his parents, who were both healthcare professionals. His dad was a nurse and his mom was a doctor, and kind of how people all the time assumed his dad was the doctor and his mom was the nurse. He grew up in that household, so he never thought of his mom as like a air quotes female nurse. And then he kind of transitions to making the case for the current assistant coach, why am I blanking on this name? I know her first name is Becky.
Yeah, I should know. Now
Becky Hammond. Sorry, Becky Hammond, rather. And he transitions to kind of talking about not really her, but about females coaching, women coaching in the NBA. And it's interesting. He makes this argument. He's like, I'm not going to make an argument that she should be a head coach because that's obvious. It'd be patronizing for me to make that argument. She doesn't need me to come and make that argument. Instead, what he does is just kind of goes through and says, here's the kind of categories of arguments that people would make against the idea of a female coach. They're exactly what you think they'd be, right? Like, won't be able to effectively be a leader, will mess up locker room culture, that sort of stuff. And he just kind of goes through and picks those off one at a time. So it's a really, really interesting read. I think it's a fascinating time to be interested in sports or in the NBA specifically. There's so many interesting things going on. My Facebook during these playoffs has been lit up by people who keep saying that we're in the golden age of basketball, and I think it's true. The talent is just off the charts in these playoffs. But this is another reason why it's interesting. I think we're on a verge where Becky Hammon has a legitimate chance of being hired, should be hired by some of these teams, and I think that's fascinating. I also think the flip side of that is that there's an opportunity that you hear a bunch of people coming out and saying this sort of nonsense, just like when we had the female color commentator on Sunday Night Baseball. You're gonna hear idiots saying nonsense. So it's interesting, but it's also a little bit scary. But I'm kind of fascinated and curious at the same time.
Yeah, it was a really articulate, well-written letter, which I hate. I should critique myself, because you know that I hate that when we say that about athletes, because it's usually just failed racism. But Pau Gasol,
especially since Pau Gasol was a dude who like dropped out of medical school to go play basketball. He's a smart dude. He's smarter than us.
Very, very smart. It was great. I think it's inevitable that she's going to get a job. I think anybody that's probably from that coaching tree, especially working under Popovich, they have to know their baseball or their basketball really, really thoroughly. And so best of luck to her. Find that article on the Players Tribune, because it's very, very good. We'll be back here in a second to discuss our two main topics for today. Okay, so we are back, and apparently somebody outside of Brian's home has started up their pickup. That was pretty loud. What is it? What's your neighbor got there? Is that a Hemi?
Oh, I didn't even hear it.
Is that a Michigan shirt? Oh, is that a big M?
It's a big M.
We're live here with Jim Harbaugh, everybody. Hi, Coach. Who's
khakis on underneath there?
Yeah, whose recruits have you poached this week?
Hopefully all of them.
All of them. Okay, so let's jump into the first topic that we want to get into. This week, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of sports betting. I'm just going to read the opening paragraph here from the New York Times when they ran the story. This happened, I believe, on Monday. So the Supreme Court struck down a 1992 federal law on Monday that effectively banned commercial sports betting in most states, opening the door to legalizing the estimated $150 billion in illegal wagers on professional and amateur sports that Americans make every year. Obviously, this is a huge story. The immediate response by the powers that be that did not want this, particularly the professional sports leagues and the NCAA, was to call up all of their lobbyists, get them on the job, and try to reverse this ruling. Not necessarily reverse the ruling, but put into effect other federal laws via Congress that will stop the legalization of sports gambling. So this happens, Brian. This is a huge story. I don't think it really didn't get the attention that I thought it would throughout the week. And I don't know if that's because of the NBA playoffs or what's going on, but I mean, to me, this is huge. Do you concur with that?
No, I mean, it's definitely a big deal. There's always been sort of a taboo around sports and gambling. And I'll be honest, it's been something that it's been a little bit behind the curtain for me, that there's just sort of intimation and insinuation that the two things can't go together. I mean, for the longest time, right? The best example of this is that we can never have a sports franchise in Vegas, because gambling's legal there. So there's just too much opportunity for too much opportunity for big time gamblers to pay off players in like a Black Sox type scandal or something. I don't know exactly what the fear is, but yeah, it's definitely a big deal. I think that the Golden Knights, who are still playing strong in the playoffs, have proven that it seems like you can have gambling and have a sports franchise in the same place. And what this Supreme Court decision sets up is where, well, basically every single state can have, maybe not Vegas level gambling, but can have sports gambling very, very close to home, very close to where your players are playing sports. Yeah, I really, this is something that I don't know if this is generational. I wonder. I'm not saying this. I'm just wondering aloud if you were to ask an older generation of sports fans if they would be like, no, this is terrible, right? It's the worst thing ever. I say this, by the way, not even as a gambler. I don't like going to casinos. I don't like playing slot machines. I don't like playing cards all that much. I get sick to my stomach when I think of losing money. So it's not really my thing. I'm not saying this as someone who's pro sports gambling or anything. I just don't understand. I don't understand the fear. Like another example for me is like I don't get the Pete Rose thing unless you can prove that he was throwing games. Who cares? Doesn't even bother me if he was betting for his teams. That doesn't bother me. That seems fine.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely on the same page as you. I think, and it's probably not unique to you and I. I think, like you had said, it's most definitely a generational thing, in the sense that or for the reasons that we participate in fantasy sports all the time, which is I guess betting, right? I mean, how is that any different? And so when this kind of thing comes out, it seems kind of I'm not surprised by it, I suppose, is what I'm saying. I want to kind of walk back a little bit and get back into the details of the particular ruling, because I think it is important to have some context about what is going on. There's a really good article by Ugerlis, I believe. I'm not sure the actual author's name. It's a one named gentleman, I suppose, like Ichiro, who wrote an article for Deadspin this week, on Tuesday. I believe he has a background in law. So this author, it's very thorough. It's very good. Basically, this ruling that happened on Monday is a reversal of the 1992 act that Congress passed, entitled the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. Let me see. What is the change the world? I'm trying to get the specifics of that language. So the two main provisions, here we go. Section 37011, which prevents states from sponsoring or permitting or promoting sports betting. And then section 37022, which makes it illegal for individuals to do the same thing if a state ignores the first part and allows sports betting anyway. So because New Jersey law now permitted sports betting, the NCAA challenged New Jersey's right to do that. So basically what that means is the federal law was that you could not have sports betting. States could not have sports betting, but the state law permitted sports betting. And so there was this other addendum, I suppose, to the PASPA law that basically said, well, if states are going to ignore the law, then we're going to be able to step in and say, no, they can't. So there you go. That's the boring legal. It's very, very complicated. I guess I'm just wondering. Okay, so
is Logan still out there? Maybe he can.
He's not.
Us and explain what's going
on. Okay. Logan, we need your help. Please, as they listen. Okay. It is for betting, and for some reason, okay, no. Okay. So basically what this means, right, is that now states where gambling is legal will be able to take bets on sports. So Colorado, you would think, in certain parts of the state, that will be inevitable. They'll be able to start a sports book immediately. Casinos in Atlantic City had put in for sports book licenses. So you would think that they were immediately going to probably take away that poker room and start some sort of sports book where they could take gambling or take bets and all of this stuff. I mean, so there, right? That's the boring legalese of it. To go back now to what you had said, do you think that we're going to see an immediate impact on the way that athletes play the game, the outcome of games? Do you think that will there be some sticky, dirty situations that arise because of this? Or is that just a conservative, old school evaluation of gambling in sports that just doesn't exist?
I would be really, really surprised if that were the case, right? And I think one way to think about this, because it is, again, like I mentioned, maybe a generational thing, is that in the past, when you've had issues with this sort of thing, it's been at the college level, right, where you've had game fixing, or it was, it wasn't that long ago in the 70s and 80s where professional athletes just didn't make all that much money. Now athletes are compensated far more handsomely than they were before. So I don't think they have an incentive to get into bed with, somebody who wants to, ask them to throw a game or to change the outcome of a game. It is, I think, the fear, right? And this was true. This was also something that was outlined in the Mitchell report. one of the arguments that people didn't pay that much attention to, that that Senator Mitchell and the congressional investigation into steroids found, was we don't want athletes taking steroids because the people who sell steroids illegally are, kind of bad people. They're criminals, and they might be able to hold the fact that they've sold a professional athlete steroids over their head and convince them to do something like, play poorly in a game or throw a game or something. So there was this kind of inroad to gambling argument there as well. And I think the same point holds, is that the incentives that may have once existed for that probably don't exist anymore. I could be wrong. If this if it's true that there's 1.2 billion, whatever you said it was, dollars in illegal gambling now, then it seems like that illegal gambling would have the potential for the same effect, right? Why are athletes not being sucked in by illegal gambling or illegal gamblers to do the exact same thing? That it's legal or not doesn't seem to matter all that much to me. I don't know. This to me reeks of really old school sort of puritanical fear of vice, right? So it thinks to me of like anti-drug, anti-alcohol, kind of conservative views on sex, sort of conservatism that just sees gambling as something that is inherently or morally wrong, right? And they're using maybe sports as a justification to kind of keep gambling contained, keep legal gambling contained.
So do you think
is that too far?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I 100% agree with that. Do you think that the continued criticism of Pete Rose is also couched in that same religious or puritanical perspective?
The Pete Rose thing has always confused me. I mean, I guess technically he broke rules. I know that there's a lot of people that really get really angry about this. I don't know. It seems to me that if Pete Rose, assuming Pete Rose never bet against his teams, what he did seems like far less of a big deal than, say, Robinson Cano just getting an 80-game suspension for taking steroids, and skewing the competitive balance on the field. And again, I sound like a broken record today. Perhaps it's generational. As someone who grew up watching baseball in the steroid era and reacted negatively to that, I find that to be a much bigger threat to the integrity of the game than the risk that gambling poses.
Let's return to this in a second after our break. All right, so we were talking about Pete Rose, and you had made the point that gambling just in general probably does not pose the same threat to the integrity of the sport or sports in the same way that something like PEDs do. So do you think we're going to eventually move out of this? Like, is this the beginning of a shift away from seeing gambling as something that is extremely wrong? Like, is that a generational thing? Are we going to move out of it as we become a more secular society? I
feel like that's gone already.
Okay.
Don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I do. And maybe that's why this decision didn't get the attention that I thought it would, is because people just don't care, especially the people who watch sports in bunches like you and I do. I just don't care what's going on. Now,
this is just old seedy Vegas stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like in the 60s and 70s, Vegas was, the stereotype was it was gangsters and mobsters, and it was, illegal stuff going on and prostitution and that sort of stuff. And Vegas now is like a destination where you take your kids, right? It's mainstream. As is gambling. Gambling's not done by like, sharply dressed Rat Pack dudes anymore. Gambling's done by, like my mother-in-law who might be listening. Like, she loves to go to Cripple Creek and go gambling. My father-in-law, they like to play the one-arm bandit. It's super mainstream. Maybe sports betting not quite as much, but gambling generally is definitely mainstream.
Do you think that this historic kind of frowning upon of gambling has anything to do with race and class? I think race in particular. I mean, you brought up Vegas, but what? Yeah. For some people, Vegas and Atlantic City stand for something. They stand for a certain ethnic identity.
I mean, I suspect that's true.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, look.
But
okay.
I'll be honest. I'm basing it largely off of like The Godfather 2, so I could be wrong.
but that's pretty racist.
That's my view of old Vegas.
Yeah,
I think it's the stereotype of old Vegas. Yeah, sure.
But that stereotype is laden with an Italian American stereotype, right? That it's filled with that negative characterization. And so, yes, I think it is. I think you just answered my question in a way that maybe you didn't intend to. The other thing is when you consider or when you think about representations of how gambling negatively affects sports, the people whom it negatively affects tend to often be Black. So I'm thinking of things like Blue Chips or He Got Game. What else am I missing in which there's fixing of the game? UNLV's run in the 1990s and how that's framed in things like ESPN's 30 for 30. There's always this alluding to poor Black athletes have to take the money of these mobsters in order to basically pay for their bills. Like, to me, that narrative is no longer true. That's the same fear that I'm sure the NCAA is going to step in and try to leverage when they're attempting to reverse this ruling and put into something else. And so that's a silly, narrow-minded argument that I think when we begin poking holes in it, it starts to fall apart relatively easily. So that's, to me, my initial kind of criticism of that. Okay. All right. We don't need a break, Brian. I just got your text. We took a break. We got a break at 22, so we're okay there. All right.
Can I ask you one question about this? Yeah, I mean, I watch more soccer than you do. Have you ever noticed this? I just Googled this because it occurred to me. I'm pretty sure that there's a bunch of gambling, betting, sportsbook companies that sponsor European sports teams.
They do.
Right?
They do.
Bet365 sponsors Stoke City. Betway sponsors West Ham United. Right? We have this fear of gambling getting anywhere near sports. But if you look at the EPL, the Premier League in England, there's no distance at all, right? They're literally sponsoring the teams. I mean, does that sort of point to the fact that this fear is a little bit, at least a little bit artificial? Or something that we've kind of contrived?
Yeah, I think.
I mean, I don't think that European soccer is full of like people throwing games and stuff.
No, I would agree. And it also.
This is going to segue into our next topic too. Maybe this is a little bit too early. If we're worried about people throwing games, then maybe we should stop giving the worst team the top draft pick, right? Because there is throwing of games now, not for betting reasons, but certainly for monetary reasons to get the better draft pick.
No, there's just a lot. Okay. Yes. Okay. There's a lot there. I want to, before we move on to the relegation talk, because I know that you want to go deep into it. I do have a fear that college athletes might be targets of some kind of corruption with this change. I feel like it might be relatively easy to take advantage of a kid in the same way that shoe companies do, that agents do, to fix a game. I don't think that's that far off. I understand those representations, the media that I just critiqued, are extremely negative, but it would seem like that is very much a possibility if it came down to money. Do you think I'm off base there?
No. I mean, but my point is that could and does happen now. It doesn't have to be this weird, archetype of a seedy gambler, meeting some young impressionable basketball player like under a highway in Gotham City or whatever. It could be, the booster club for University of Southern California offering Reggie Bush's family a house.
Yeah,
I mean that's sort of the taking advantage of people who are in need or could use some money is not a unique problem to gambling, and to frame it as such is unfair, right? It's the same as Adidas, right? Isn't that who just got in a bunch of trouble? Throwing money at college players to make sure they sign for the right places. It's the same thing. Why? What's the difference? Is that one of them is corporate?
No, I think you're
and that's the funniest part, is that there was a point probably when the majority of gambling was not corporate. It was all off book, right? It was a local bookie or something like that, or an underground casino or an underground gambling house or something like that. But now that's not the case. Now it's very mainstream. It's on Front Street. You can see it all happening. And I mean, the legitimacy of an Adidas is probably equivalent to, like the Bellagio in Vegas or something like that. Right, so I really do. It does strike me as a carryover. We really Logan Martin's lighting up our Facebook page. We need to have him on if we could make him call in right now.
I know. I wish that would be. Yeah, he does. He does. No, he's kind of pointing out that this is basically giving the responsibility to states individually, as opposed to the federal government really dictating what's happening. I don't foresee. I mean, there are certain states in the union that are probably never going to legalize gambling, and they're never going to allow for betting on sports. So this is just kind of taking this out of the hands of the federal government, which that makes sense. Okay. I don't think I have anything else to say about that. Do you? You feel like we covered it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the one thing I will kind of say is I'm anxious to see how relationships between leagues and large institutions play out in response to this. And in particular, I'm thinking about what happens with the NCAA and the NFL and that relationship, if one exists. The NFL benefits greatly from gambling. It benefits greatly from fantasy sports. The NCAA is probably going to continue to push back against this. So what does that look like? What is that relationship? Does it strain that relationship? Does it make things worse? Same thing maybe with the NBA and NCAA. Yeah.
Logan's pointed this out on the Facebook page that the Supreme Court ruling does not legalize gambling in every state necessarily, right? That states could go back and pass laws that could prohibit gambling. And you sort of mentioned that yourself. So, and then the Deadspin article that you mentioned, I think you posted it up there, makes this point too, that the reaction might be that you get, the NBA or the NFL or them coming together and sort of lobbying state governments to pass laws that are specific to regulating or banning sports gambling. So I think this honestly it is definitely an impactful decision, but it sets the stage for a fight that's going to take place over the next, the coming months and coming years. I don't think that it's done anything at this point, but it does mean that we have to have a conversation with a more immediate timeline, right, to figure out what is the stance and the opinion of these sports organizations are going to be. And hey, listen, maybe their response is different, right? Maybe they say, we have to step up our efforts to make sure that we're not being, influenced by gaming, or we're not being infiltrated by, the effects of gaming or gambling. But we also are going to kind of, do a 180 and embrace it, right? And be like the EPL and, get sponsors to, have the Bellagio sponsor the Vegas, NBA team or something like that.
And
I think that would be smart. Here's just by way of example, I don't think we'd thought we'd ever see advertising on major sports athletes' jerseys in the United States, but suddenly that popped up this year in the NBA, which is a very kind of European look, right? All the NBA teams have got a little tiny logo for an advertiser. They're selling logo space on their jerseys. I think that is indicative of a shift, right? That NBA teams that we've talked about this a bunch on the radio show and the podcast, that sports sees the writing on the wall, that the TV advertising market, the way that sports has worked for the last 20 years at least, is not necessarily going to continue to work that way. So, this could be just one of many changes in the approach to sports that organizations have to deal with, and they might embrace it.
We've only been on the radio for 3 months, but your ability to transition from one point to one point during a break is just amazing. We went from gambling to the EPL. And with that, let's take a break and we'll get back. We'll come back and we'll talk relegation. All right. So this is a topic we've wanted to talk about for a couple weeks. There were some really good articles. You sent me the article. Oh, shoot. I got to find it. I have my notes here. Shame, insufficient. It's time to relegate the junk teams in sports. And there was an article actually this week by one of the leading editors and writers at Deadspin, Tom Lay. I have a good idea. I have a very good idea that will fix everything wrong with American pro sports. So you are the European soccer expert. I'm going to hand this one over to you, and I will chime in and add my commentary whenever. Relegation, what is it? What does it mean? What should it look like here in the States? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, relegation is simple. It happens in, I guess I won't say every single European league, but most of them do. And in fact, it's obvious in the way that they're structured. There's Serie A and La Liga and League One and the EPL and the Premier League, and all those are numbered as number one, right? They're the A league, or they're the one league. They're the top league, and then There's a series of lower level professional soccer, professional football teams. And the way that relegation works is that the bottom four teams in the EPL, anyways, in the European or the British Premier League, the bottom four teams at the end of the season get sent down from the Premier League to the second league, and the top four teams in the second league get brought up, and that happens at the lower levels too. You can work your way from the third to the second, from the fourth to the third, and that sort of stuff. So regulation just means that you get rewarded for playing well. If you win the British Premier League, you get more of a share of the BPL revenue that they generate from advertising from their TV deals. If you win, you earn qualification to other tournaments and other leagues, right? If you're in the top couple teams in the EPL, that's one way that you make it to the Champions League, which makes your team a bunch of money. And if you lose, you get sent down, which costs your team a bunch of money. Usually, if a team gets regulated, if you're a big time player, there's something in your contract too that says that you can become a free agent, or that they forfeit your contract rights or something. So there's a big risk to failure, which is the complete opposite of the way it works in American sports, where bottom teams face no punishment. There's no stick. You don't get in trouble for being terrible. And in fact, there's kind of perverse incentives for you to do poorly. If you know you're not going to make it to the playoffs, or you don't have a chance to compete for a championship, there's an incentive for you to throw games to try and get the higher draft position in our amateur drafts. So relegation simple. Like you would get sent down to the minors basically, if you were in the bottom of the league.
So we got a lot of really fantastic feedback from folks this week, because we posed that question, whether or not relegation should happen, on Facebook and on Instagram. And there were a lot of soccer fans who said yes, it needs to happen here in American sports, just not quite sure how that would look. There were other fans who talked about just how awful regular season sports are. And I would tend to agree, outside of the NFL, that, in the middle of July, when you're watching, or even at the end of the season, right, when you're watching baseball, so many of those games just don't matter. Whereas, you see some of the tears and the anguish on the faces of a lot of these European football fans watching their team basically be relegated down a league. And so I'm all for it. I just don't know how it would look, or what would need to take place. Someone asked you that, right? If you were to envision relegation for, let's say, Major League Baseball, what would that look like to you? Like, where would we even start?
Well, I'm not sure that you could just send them down to AAA, because
Okay.
those are affiliated teams with current major league teams. I think the suggestion that the guy makes in Deadspin is that you would take a certain chunk of teams the first year and send them all down to create kind of a minor league. So you would start with a bigger chunk. You would send like 10 teams down, and that would create your second tier league. And then after that, you would swap 3 teams back and forth, or 4 teams back and forth. So that's one way that you could do it. Another way to do it is to just have more teams, right? You could expand the size of any given league. You could have, you could get 6 more cities who want to have an MLB team or something, and obviously they would have to start in kind of the relegation league, in that B league. But you would have to functionally create a second league somehow, whether that means adding teams, or whether that means reducing the number of teams that are in that pro level. One way or another, you would have to create a second pool of teams. And I don't think it's as hard as it sounds. You have functional minor league teams anyways. The NHL has got a bunch of little feeder leagues, right? The East Coast Hockey League, the OHL, all these little feeder leagues. The NBA has got the D League and the Summer League and the G League and all of that stuff. So you've got a bunch of players who play on, practice teams and that sort of stuff. For the NBA already, you could make teams out of those players. There's no shortage of players. There's tons and tons of high quality college players who may not be good enough to make an NBA roster, but you could cobble together another team out of. I think the biggest problem with this is the model of American sports is centered around a draft, which is not the way that at least European soccer works. It's you negotiate. It's sort of like always total free agency where you negotiate buying the rights to a player. And that's something that teams can swap. They can sell, right? Like I can sell you the rights to a player, and then secondarily you have to pay that person their compensation. So they get their salary plus the rights to that player is worth a certain value on an open market. In an attempt to create parity in American sports, we do the draft instead, where you're not negotiating with individual players as they come up. The other difference too is that, conceivably, if you're playing soccer in Europe, you can move between leagues, right? You could go from playing in La Liga to the Bundesliga to the EPL or whatever. So we don't have that. We don't have that movement between leagues quite as much. So our systems are different, kind of by necessity. But it would demand some sort of change there. Maybe getting rid of the draft or reimagining what the draft looks like. But I agree. Parity is important, but not to the point of kind of forcing the best player to go play for the Cleveland Browns every year.
Would it have to involve ownership seeing their actual arena or their venue as less of a moneymaker than we have now? I wonder if an owner has to be more willing to basically, I don't know, have a team performing in a arena or a field that stadium only holds, I don't know, 15,000 people as opposed to 43. Is that it just seems to all be about money. And I wonder how do we, I know that those European soccer teams make a lot of money.
It would be way riskier.
Yeah.
For an ownership to own a team that could be regulated, because you would obviously not generate the ticket sales. They wouldn't be worth as much. You wouldn't get as much in advertising revenue. It's probably not as popular on TV. You would lose all of that money if were you to get relegated. The flip side of that, though, is you create kind of a uniform incentive for all teams to always try their best to win, which probably makes the sport better, right? Yeah. As opposed to modern NBA, where oftentimes you've got sub 500 teams making the playoffs, where you've got huge differences in quality between the Eastern and the Western Conference. You've got teams fighting to get more balls in the draft lottery to try and get a top draft pick. And meanwhile, those teams that are not trying hard to win games are playing against other teams who are, right, which skews the results of your record anyhow. Right? If on the last game of the season you have to win a game to make the playoffs, and you're playing against the Phoenix Suns, who are, I'm not going to say that they were tanking, but they were in the bottom of the league, right? And you got another team who also needs to win to make the playoffs, and they have to play the Cavs or something like that. That's not fair. It's better if everyone's playing teams who are trying their best to win all the time. You think that's an assumption, right? That everyone's trying their best to win. But that's not the case. Do you remember the story out of the Olympics a few years ago? These badminton teams were trying to tank on purpose.
Yes,
so
I do.
They could determine their seed in the playoffs or whatever, in the elimination badminton rounds, and they got thrown out of the tournament. Like, badminton says not trying your best to win is a reason to eject you, to disqualify you. Right? That we don't have a more visceral reaction to people trying to lose, or at least not trying their hardest to win. It's anathema to competition and what sports are. And that's really what this is about. It's not about relegation. It's about, eliminating incentives to not try your best, because it undermines the entire foundation of a competitive enterprise.
I love that idea. Yeah, I think that is, these owners need to have, to me, a little bit more awareness of their civic responsibility. I know that sounds silly, but they're reaping so much money from the communities in which they build a stadium or have a team. And so give us a good product to watch, right? You owe us that, or else we're just going to stop or be punished. But we are out of time for today. Thank you to our sponsors. Our newest one, Lost Highway Brewing. Thank you for coming on board with us. Head over there, mention the show, and get yourself a discounted beer. For Mentra, they're offering 15% off, anytime you go in and use Sports Nerds as your promo code. 10% off when you go to Pizza and do the game room thing. Mention us. And, of course, Grist Brewing Company. Gris never gave us a promo code, but they make good beer, so you just go in there and drink.
Just go over it.
Anyway,
just tell them our names.
Westerfield and Martin Law, J Communication Solutions, Orange Collar Media, everybody out there. This is our last
Guardian Tax Consulting.
Guardian Tax Solution. This is our last go on the radio. We hope that you will continue to follow us on social media and via podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Brian, you have a great weekend. I hope nobody breaks into your house. Good talk today, buddy.
Yep.
All right. See ya.
See ya. All right. I am out, dude.
Later, buddy. Take care.
All right, later.
See ya.
Does this you have what you need?